Hey guys, thanks for watching my channel today. My name's Don, and my channel is all about fishing, mostly about fishing after the age of 70. Today, though, I want to talk about back when bass boats had ashtrays. Now, I know you're thinking right away, I don't remember a bass boat ever having an ashtray. Well, if you ever owned a bass boat that had an ashtray, you're from a time when fishing was slower, louder, smokier, and somehow a whole lot simpler. You know, I was thinking the other day, there was a time when the bass boats didn't come with cup holders, USB ports, or screens bigger than, my television, but they did come with ashtrays. And let that sink in a minute. I mean, if your boat didn't have an ashtray built into the console, folks probably figured that they just didn't finish the boat because it was pretty common back then. And, for a lot of guys, myself included, I didn't want you getting, burning a hole in my carpeting. And it didn't matter if it was a new boat or a used boat. That happened all the time. Guys would drop their cigarettes, especially when they catch a fish and drop it. But back then, it just it just made sense, and nobody questioned it. Uh, Not the boat companies, not the tournament directors, and definitely not the fishermen. I mean, I was smoking. I started when I was a young kid, 13, 14 years old. So it was just part of me. It was my persona. Uh, but most of the bass boats back then, and this is really probably in the mid 70s, back when they really started producing a lot of the bass boats. Before that, before that, boats typically didn't have carpeting in them and they weren't really set up like a bass boat. But thanks to Ray Scott and the startup of the bass tournaments back in the early 70s, late 60s, we ended up with you buy a boat and it would have a big motor and it would have a live well that worked sometimes. And often it would have an ashtray that was screwed right into the dash, just like it was part of all the other sacred equipment. And that ashtray wasn't optional. It was an important as the steering wheel. Yeah, for most of us, we smoked, so we considered it to be pretty essential. We had ashtrays, in our trucks, in our cars. Hell, if you got on a plane to fly somewhere, there was an ashtray on the handle of the seat, the armrest. So, back then, mornings smelled differently. I can remember as though I was there yesterday. Morning takeoffs in bass tournaments, uh, they had a very specific smell. It was kind of a combination of two-stroke oil, black coffee, and cigarette smoke hanging kind of like fog over the top of the water. You'd idle out of the no wake zone and one hand on the wheel, the other one holding a cigarette out over the side, of course, so you didn't get any ashes inside the boat. And you didn't want the ashes to blow back in your face. The uh, the ashtray earned its keep. It earned its keep often before the sun even came up. Back then there were no electronics, so there was plenty of time. We didn't have GPS. We didn't have side scan. We didn't have forward facing sonar. And we didn't have a clue where the fish were, other than the fact that we'd always caught them along the shore. So that's where we were headed. But we had time. We had plenty of time. Time was on our side. We'd pick a spot, we'd think about it, long enough to figure out what lure we wanted to use. And then we'd light up a cigarette. We'd make a cast, you know, we'd work that lure back into the boat. And if there was a bass down there, and if we caught him, we'd fight him, like he was the biggest fish that ever lived. We'd get him back in the boat, and if it was a tournament, You know, we'd make sure he was over 12 inches or whatever the size restriction was. Drop him in the live well, and what was the first thing we did? We lit up another cigarette. I mean, that was common practice back then. It was almost like you were rewarding yourself. Tournament days were a little bit different than days that we just went out for fun. Back in those days, the guys, they smoked at the takeoff. We smoked while we were tying knots. I can remember the smoke going into my eyes and getting to the point where I couldn't see. Never occurred to me to get rid of the cigarette. But we would, you know, if we weren't getting any bites, fish weren't cooperating, I think we smoked more. You know, we'd smoke while we waited for that bite. And some of us even smoked while we were fighting the fish. I know that's hard to believe in today's world, but that's the way it was, you know, back then. So try that today, and you probably get escorted off the ramp faster than, you know, trying to weigh in an undersized fish. These days, you don't even think about lighting up without, you know, especially if somebody's filming what you're doing. You don't see any of the pros, you know, walking in that line, you know, with their bag of fish. You don't see any of them with a cigarette hanging off out of their mouth. And yet, you know, way back in the 70s, everybody smoked. And I mean, these guys would be standing in line with their fish. Every one of them would have a cigarette hanging out of their mouth. So the funny thing is, though, back then, we didn't fish as fast. Without all the rules and all the gadgets, I think we all tended to just fish a little slower. We weren't able to run 70 miles an hour from spot to spot, and we didn't stare at screens all day. We didn't act like the fish owed us anything. We just fished where we thought they were, and sometimes we were right, sometimes we weren't. Sometimes fish were there for an hour, sometimes they were there for a half a day, sometimes we never found them. But nobody was in a hurry to leave, and most of us at least stayed throughout the entire tournament and gave it our best efforts. So, you know, the boats changed over the years, and so did we. Somewhere along the line, somewhere along the way, the ashtrays disappeared. The electronics multiplied. Boats started getting faster. Most of us quit smoking. Took me a long time, but most of us quit smoking. And some of us quit running wide open because, you know, it would go through gas so fast when you were trying to hit 60 and 70 miles an hour. It just didn't make a lot of sense. And most of us stuck with it and continued to fish throughout our entire lives. We adapted. As we got older, the trips got a little shorter. You know, we started looking more at the time that we wanted to fish, started making smarter decisions. And it turns out experience weighs a whole lot less than bad habits. And what did those ashtrays really represent? Well, they really represented a slower pace. They offered a little more patience, a little less pressure, and certainly more enjoyment. People can say what they want about cigarettes and the dangers of smoking, and for those of us that smoked, especially those of us that smoked for any length of time, we enjoyed smoking. You know, beer and a cigarette, you know, cup of coffee and a cigarette, talking on the phone with a cigarette. They were just natural. And fishing with a cigarette was too. We weren't racing against the clock. We weren't chasing the internet. We were just fishing. And if we didn't catch them, well, we still had a good morning. Today's truth, you know, when it comes to fishing, I don't smoke. I don't miss the smoke. I don't miss the cigarettes. I don't miss coughing in the morning on the takeoff or just on the morning when I go out by myself. And I don't miss the smell of the cigarettes that used to hang on the boat or hang on me when I got home from fishing. But But I do miss what it was like to fish back in those days. Again, there was no rush, no drama, no panic. Just water, a rod, and enough time to enjoy both. So if you ever owned a bass boat with an ashtray, you didn't just fish back then. You actually lived it. Anyway, that's my thoughts. Uh, Hope you enjoyed it. Little look back for us old guys that can remember those days. You know, if you enjoyed the video, leave me a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. And leave me a comment. I know there's a lot of smokers, old smokers, non-smokers today, guys that used to smoke, that can probably relate to this video. So if you would, leave me a comment or two, I'd appreciate it. Thanks, and hope you have a wonderful day.